This is a very interesting case. Cash-Landrum, you probably have all heard of it. This was actually a extraterrestrial vehicle that was being test flown by 4 humans out of the Nevada test range. And this we have from an Air Force intelligence guy who is the principal investigator. You'll see his clip later talking about the fact that he debriefed the pilots of this and what happened. As you know, the people underneath this object, when it was out of control, were irradiated and were extremely and very sick, had to be hospitalized. One of the famous cases in 1980. Now, what happened is that when this occurred, they couldn't get the extraterrestrial energy power plant to work. So they put on, foolishly, a portable nuclear power plant on this thing. And they were test flying it out of the Nevada test range, Area 51. By the way, nobody calls it that, but people don't know what's out there. And it was being flown to a base in Texas. It went out of control outside Houston, Huffman, Texas, I believe it was. And it came down and irradiated, and actually irradiated the land there. And actually, that whole road had to be repaved clandestinely. Now, the public was left to believe this was, the aliens came down and poisoned everybody. Or they didn't say. They were happy for people to reach and leap to these conclusions. In reality, we have now proof and testimony from the principal investigator for the Air Force who debriefed the 4 pilots on this, humans. And that object, my friend, was test flown by humans, but it was extraterrestrial. So this is a hybrid case where you have an extraterrestrial air form and systems, but the power energy system, they couldn't quite get to work. They put this nuclear power plant on it. It had a filter or some problem where it malfunctioned, started spewing this stuff out to these poor victims who have never been compensated. In fact, the case went to court. The judge threw it out because the government said, we don't know what this is. We had nothing to do with it. But the truth is, they weren't lying. The government, people talk about the government. Which government? Who in the government? The nature of an unacknowledged special access project like this is that if the Secretary of Defense doesn't know about it and the director of the CIA isn't read into it and they're lying to the president about it, do you think the public information officer or the case officer for an Air Force base near Houston is going to know what the hell this was? No. So they're not lying. This is plausible deniability because since they don't know, they can testify under oath, this wasn't ours. We know nothing about this. Now we know for a fact. And we have the recorded video testimony of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, principal investigator on this, Richard Doty, who is a master of disinformation in his career, but is coming clean on some of this. So next year, what we're going to see are a series of schematics and cases of over the years, very interesting. This is 1956, sort of a domed object with these underneath. This was a man-made anti-gravity vehicle from the 50s that was seen, and we can go to the drawing of it. Very good, excellent illustrations. And a very well-documented case. I'm going to go through a number of these examples. Next. This is one from New Zealand, our friends from down under. This was also a man-made object. The date on this is listed somewhere below there. I believe it was in the 50s. And that object, a very well-documented case, occurred. And someone came out and it was a human in sort of an astronaut suit. But this, I believe, was 1959. Here we are. Yeah, Blenheim, New Zealand. It had these flames, so it had a combination of anti-gravity and also other types of energy systems. And people say, oh, this is from New Zealand. I said, oh yeah, 1959. Next. But we're going to run through a bunch of these quickly. Okay, next. This is a really interesting one. Again, the dates, this was 1966. Love the Mustang. And there was an object that came in and for some reason landed malfunction. Another early prototype of a man-made electrogravitic, meaning anti-gravity, high voltage system. And it rose up and took off like a spark off a grinder, is how it was described. But you can see there's some components of it from conventional aerospace aircraft on the front, the bubble. But this was, again, it sort of had a high drilling, whining sound as it took off and was gone. And this is man-made, 1966. Next. And this is very similar to some of the Tic Tac things. It's got an arc on it. I think this was in, what date was this? This is 20, well, no, not 2017. That's not sure of the date. Anyway, but a very interesting object, reminiscent of some of the Tic Tac and other objects. We have a number of videos of these canister and cylinder objects. This was seen in enough detail. And you can see the rivets. You can see the detail. An extraterrestrial vehicle is seamless, has no parts like that, has no welds. Those, when you see those, my friends, those are not extraterrestrial. Those are man-made. And there are a series of generations of these that have been rolled out since the 50s operationally. They were studied before then. Next. This is a really interesting one. Again, this 1972, so we're talking almost 50 years ago. It looks like an iron with this rectangular object on it that was seen, and multiple witnesses. Again, this is a man-made platform, a silent electrogravitic. Next. And this is a really interesting one. This is from also 72. It has these sort of flaming energy out of the rear of it, and a bubble. Another one from that's man-made. I don't forget which city this was over.
Venezuela.
Yeah, in Venezuela. And people say, really, these other countries? Oh, yes, all over the world. I mean, these operations are not just out of remote places like Area 51. So they have these facilities all over the world, you know, Alice Springs here and there, and all over, and they can go anywhere very quickly because they're not using jets and rockets. Because even our most, you know, really extraordinary craft may get to anywhere in the world in a couple hours. These don't take that long. So those have been experimented with in different shapes, forms, and sizes. Many of them are based on acquired extraterrestrial vehicles that we have shot down and studied and then experimented with the airframe and the propulsion and energy systems, the flaming ellipse. Next. This is an interesting one. This is from 1980s. I'm just taking you in chronological order. Number one, there are a lot of objects that are sort of rectangular or domed rectangles, totally silent, can float over the landscape. Many of the objects we'll get to in a moment, and seeing the Hudson Valley back in the 80s, 90s, were those kinds of objects. These are, again, electromagnetogravitics. These are pop culture anti-gravity, and different versions of them, different airframes, different experimental types, and many of them have been deliberately flown over populated areas to prompt a UFO sighting, but make people think that they are the extraterrestrial ones. So you have two things going on simultaneously: actual extraterrestrial vehicles and the ones that are made by clandestine aerospace and black budget funding in the unacknowledged special access projects, the deep black world of engineering. Next. I mean, all these cases, look, we have hundreds and hundreds. This would go on for days if we were going, but these are very interesting, excellent drawings. Now, this case, of course, I was very involved with, as you know. This is the Japan Airlines case of 747 going over Alaska, and we can go up, and the pilot had this massive vehicle come forward. This is a real one. Let's look at it. Can you scroll? Look? No. There's a wonderful schematic of what the pilot saw. It was a large, seamless, almost like walnut-shaped object, massive. that was, I guess, didn't make it into the slide, sorry. That was the Japan Airlines case. That's one of the disclosure witnesses, as you know, was Mr. Callahan. And he was the chief FAA person in charge of accidents and incidents when this occurred during the Reagan years. And he actually has handed to us, and I have, the original radar films, check tracings, not a copy, the originals. We have them. And the Japan Airlines pilot encountered this object, and it would be, you know, this part of the sky at 1 second, and a couple sweeps of the radar, or one sweep would be in another direction altogether. And the pilot, the Japanese pilot said, described it. It was actually on military radar, on board, visually seen, and civilian radar. So this got kicked up to the highest level of the FAA. And at that meeting, if you remember the disclosure project, the CIA came in and said, we're going to confiscate all of the data on this. And they had just stacks and stacks of digital data on this case. And so they had to give it up. And Mr. Callahan says, yeah, okay, we'll give it to you. Turns out those were copies. He kept the originals. And when he left the FAA, he took them, and we have them. True. Okay, so next. This is a very interesting, a pyramid-shaped object. We have a model similar to it here. Now this has all kinds of tubes and structures on the bottom. And what's interesting, this is 1994, there are extraterrestrial vehicles that are pyramid-shaped. But there are also man-made ones that they've made to look like them. So they're copycat. You see what they're doing? So it's like the old commercial. Is it real or is it Memorex? So is this the only way I'm mic'd? So we probably need to have people handing me these models. If I can have an assistant there and then hand off here. There you go. Thank you. So here's the, thank you. And this is a great one. I like this one because we may have, this is also in England, 1990. And this one is great because it has, if you look at the underside, there are the girders and the structures, and they're even weld marks. Now, of course, this is a triangular, and the people under it could see that and could see the light in the center and the three on the end. That is man-made. That is an anti-grav object. And we have many people who have been in the aerospace classified projects who have described these and how they operate. And so we have massive files on these sort of different kinds of triangles. Now, just to make things more complex, because the world is complex, there are extraterrestrial vehicles that are triangular and that are saucer shaped and that are other weird shapes. So to make things complicated here, how are you going to know? Well, you got to be close enough to it to see. And if you can't see the superstructure detail, you're not going to know whether it's extraterrestrial or not. But I'll give you these few hints. The ET ones are not manufactured by digging stuff up and soldering things together and what have you. That's not how they manufacture. They are doing it through a frequency sonic resonance manufacturing that pulls from a template an object in its entirety as a piece from the elementals, let's call it, of space-time, the foundation of energy of space-time. And it comes into 3D, like 3D printing, but for a whole spacecraft, but not putting plastic molding injectors in, but it being brought from the finest foundation of energy, not only the 0 point, but beyond that even trans-dimensionally. So this is trans-dimensional manufacturing. We don't have time to go into this. We'll go into it more this week for everyone. And then this one, again, this is a very interesting one. This is the very famous Phoenix Lights one. Who was here for that? Anybody? I was. So there are a couple events that happened then. And we have had both ET vehicles, then piggybacked on man-made events. And this is really confusing because once there's something that really happens demonstrably, that is a sighting or an event, they will then put up objects and have things occur that are the man-made ones to confuse people. And they'll even do other decoys, so drop flares, all kinds of things. So when I was here in March of 1997, I flew in on an airline, and as I was doing final approach into Sky Harbor Airport, I did the CE5 protocols and asked the ETs to do something that would be very definitive that night or while I was there, because we were at a digital lab that was run by an intelligence group. And we were getting the best photos and videos that we could for the whole planet for the congressional briefings in April of 1997. That's why I was here. And then a few hours later, this whole event happened, Phoenix Lights. And there were a lot of things that were coming out of the South Mountains. Last November, when we were here for the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind premiere, we did a hike up there and came down at sunset, and an object dropped, materialized right over us and went. You saw a couple of people who are my friends here were there with me and saw it. So you have both phenomena happening. And this is the problem. People are going to say, it's all man-made, it's all extraterrestrial. No, and we need to get another layer of understanding here. And particularly any important thing that happens, by definition, is going to be inundated with a cover story, and where they're going to deceive people from the real over to the staged, the DDT, let's call it. So these are more of the triangular, and this is a great one. This is 1989 in Belgium, that you can see all the tubes and structures underneath of the Belgian cases. So this particular one was very much a man-made one. Again, this is global. Don't think, you have to think, it's a transnational group that runs these unacknowledged special access projects, clandestine organization, is global. They don't think of international, they're transnational, and have been at least since the 60s. And so here's another one, very interesting. Again, this is from Missouri, a little different from the ones that you can see the girders and the welds on the side. I hope you can see that. That's the camera and the people on the webinar. And these are also well-known platforms. You can basically, once you get your lifter system in place that causes mass cancellation, you can create any kind of air structure around it. And it doesn't matter if it's aerodynamic or not, because the way it moves, let's say, the molecules of air around it. So it's basically moving an electromagnetic field effect. So there's no resistance and there is no sonic boom. That's man-made. We've had it for decades. Is this too much? I'm just trying to run through these. This is to give you just a sense of all the different types and structures that we know have been man-made objects, various different, some of them are kind of hybrids. They'll have some conventional propulsion as well as electrogravitic, different shapes, and they all have structural superstructure components that are clearly a man-made machine, not an interstellar vehicle. And this is one of my favorite. I love this one because this one is, this is from Southern Illinois in 2000, it's not that long ago. And it's this, like a ranch house with the pen, but it's like, how Midwestern. And it's this object, was totally non-aerodynamic, silent, floating. You'll hear a transformer buzzing sound often from these. And a similar rectangular ones were some years ago, I think it was in the 1990s, were in the Amazon. It was near where there was a E-Systems facility. And these were put up and engaged in, they went from animal mutilations being staged by clandestine human organizations to these were doing human vivisections and killing humans. But of course, they wanted everyone to believe that aliens were doing vivisections on people. No, it wasn't. It was our sociopaths in this organization. So, and here's another. This is a great one. This is from 1983. Hudson Valley, very famous cases, many witnesses to these transformer sounding objects, and underneath, when they were close, you can see superstructure and tubes and other things. That is not extraterrestrial. Now, have there been extraterrestrial vehicles of boomerang and other shapes? Yes. But where do you think they get the idea? And also, how else do you create a false flag? You have to create structures that would be believably not aerodynamic. So, and this is another one. This is another boomerang shape from the Hudson Valley. This is several years of these occurring. You've all heard these cases. And you see underneath the superstructure and the aspects of it. And, you know, these are it looks a little bit like the B-2 stealth, but there's a different. Again, they were silent unless you were close enough, you could hear this sort of electronic transformer sort of sound from it. And another one. So I just wanted to run through these. They're all fun. And I want to thank the people who have worked hard to create these, from the reports and the photographs that exist. This one, actually, you could see up in it, the people looked in and they could see other structures and platforms inside under the center of this particular, not an equilateral triangle, but isosceles, is that correct? Yep. So those are the reason I wanted to show you that is sort of to give you a sense of the variety, the type of craft. I don't know if we had any other pictures. I think maybe some of them got dropped, but it's enough to give you a sense of what we have. Now, the archive on this is very large, and I want to pay homage to Mark McCandlish, who did the drawings. If we want to bring up Mark McCandlish's work and the schematics. Now, this is based on a very interesting event that happened at the Norton Air Force Base, which has now been decommissioned in Southern California. And there were a number of people, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, you know, Brad Sorensen and some other people are there. There's a man on my team who is very close friends with Frank Carlucci, Secretary of Defense at the time. He calls him Uncle Frank, who was there. Senator Cranston was there because they were read into these unacknowledged projects. And this was kind of like an air show, and there was sort of a sales pitch going on. And you see these three objects. There was the smaller one, a medium one, and a big one. You know, baby bear, mama bear, and papa bear, as one guy who was there called it. And these were from around, the components in them were apparently from between 1950, late 50s, early 60s. But these particular models had obviously been used quite a bit and had gone in the solar system, various places in our solar system, not the whole universe, but our solar system back then, I mean, long before we landed on the moon. Now, what's interesting is that one of the people who was there did an interview and shared some of the information. And I'm loath to read to people, but this is just so compelling. I just want to share this. I'm not going to say who this was or how I got this recording transcript, but it's very interesting. And he says the small one was 20 feet. The next was 60 in diameter. And the next one maybe 120 feet. It looked like it was the small one looked like personal light speed vehicle. It just boggles my mind to think about it. And he said that this one, these objects, didn't require its own fuel source. They had found a new fuel source that was everywhere in the universe. It was a wavelength frequency that was on the order of 500 times the speed of light. Very important. It's invisible. We can't feel it. They said that everything in the universe is a vibration. Light is just a resisted vibration of this other force. It is really fast vibrations or frequencies. If you start with this force that's 500 times the speed of light and you resist it down, you get gravity. Resist down more and you get magnetism. Then resist it down more and you get light. Resist down and you get sound, heat, etc., and down to things we really recognize. Einstein and others could only sense light, So thought that's the fastest thing in the universe. That's all we can clock. And they were dead wrong, that light is the fastest thing in the universe. If you wanted to go to the moon, say, you'd point the upper video camera that was on these objects and point it to wherever you wanted to go, and then you'd put the crosshairs on it. Then you'd move the rheostat, a lever on the inside of the seat, to add power and allow that power to be available, and it would go. And it goes on and on. Now, why is this important? Because this was at an air show in 1988, and there's more than one witness to this, by the way. And we can put up Mark McCandlish's schematic of the interior that was based on the description. And I want to honor Mark McCandlish. He just recently, the last couple of weeks, passed away. But he was at the original National Press Club event, and he was just a really smart, courageous, talented aerospace illustrator who had learned of this. And you can see some of the detail and where the compartment would be for the people. According to some people who were there, some of this isn't exactly accurate, but it's a pretty close rendition. And it's a very important piece of history, because that was the transition between a Reagan administration and George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush. And it was in November of 1988. And they were trying to get more funding for Star Wars, SDI, what's now called Space Force, and classified aerospace contracting for these unacknowledged special access project systems. The reason this is all critically important for you to understand is that the people who are running these projects want you to think, as I said earlier, that nobody in the United States has any knowledge of these objects that they are now euphemistically calling UAPs, which is ludicrous, the term, on the face of it. I don't use it except in a ridiculing way, because it's just absolutely not that. But ultimately, if you don't take my word for this and all the data and all the witnesses, why don't we listen to a guy named Ben Rich, head of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And Ben Rich had a friend that wrote to him, John Andrews, and he said, the topic is UFOs. I believe there are lots of UFOs. And I'm also tend to believe that there are two categories: man-made UFOs and extraterrestrial UFOs. And Ben Rich says, yes, I'm a believer in both categories, and I feel everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs are unfunded opportunities. So there's funny underlining unfunded opportunities. There are opportunities that could have been used for a lot of great purposes. So this is dated 1986. And, you know, Ben Rich was the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, was a very renowned aerospace figure. And you think, well, people who want, I think, first of all, this is a document, and all this is stuff needs to go right to the Senate Intelligence Committee. We're planning to do a closed briefing for them ahead of the Director of National Intelligence. So if the Director of National Intelligence dumps a bunch of falsehoods onto the Senate Intelligence Committee, they're going to have received all of this and more that you're seeing. We don't have time to go through all of it prior to. This is why this is very important. But I'd like to invite a wonderful gentleman up, Mr. Goodall. He's a renowned aerospace illustrator and researcher. And if you would come up, he has a couple he's a sort of surprise guest here today. And I would welcome you to share your story, that last conversation that probably anyone had with Ben Rich, and also your little quick story you had with the lady who had worked for the National Security Agency.
Sure. I've been an aviation writer and aerospace historian most of my adult life. I'm 76, so it goes for a long time. But I had somewhere along the line, and it was probably through John Andrews from Testers, that I became a pen pal, if you want to call it that, with Ben Rich. He was Kelly Johnson's right-hand man, and when Kelly Johnson retired, the only person that could really fill his shoes was Ben. And for 25 years, Ben and I spoke. He either called me or I called him once a quarter for 25 years. I could call him at Skunk Works. June, his secretary, would say, just a second, I'll put you into Mr. Rich. He'd be in a conference with a room full of engineers. He'd put me on speakerphone, and we talked for 40 minutes, 45 minutes. But He was dying of esophageal cancer. This is the mid-90s. He'd already retired from Lockheed. And I tracked him down. He was at USC Medical Center near the end of his life. And we were talking about John Andrews and some other stuff, and we started talking about UFOs. And he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert, and he wasn't referring to Area 51, but said, we have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you, and he was talking directly to me, beyond what you can imagine. And he said, if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. I said, Ben, you want to expand upon that? And typical Ben response was no. And he had the nerve to die on me about 10 days later. The other thing, late last year, I think 2019, maybe it was 2020, and these last 2 years have been sort of a blur. On CNN, I'm not sure if it was CNN, but Tucker Carlson on Fox announced that the federal government had made a statement that we have equipment that is not of this earth. There was also a government employee that said the same thing. So I have a friend of mine who works for the National Security Agency. I knew her from Hawaii, and she was in Pine Gap, which is Alice Springs, which is in the middle of nowhere, if you've ever been to Australia. And I sent her an email. I said, you believe in UFOs? And I mean, instantly I got a response back. I said, no, why did you see one? And I said, no. And then she came back. So I can't go over it on, through electronic means. Maybe one of these days we can sit down face to face. He said, but they're here. And that was your comment. Now she went from Pine Gap to Guantanamo Bay, and now she's back in Hawaii. And I hope to get to Hawaii sometime this year and sit down with her face to face. So that's my piece.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Very important little pieces of history. Now, the next thing I want to share, because I know, we have so much today, is something that I want to set the stage before we put it up on screen. A few months ago, a woman who is the granddaughter of a seamstress who was at the atomic bomb site, who actually was the seamstress that made the cover for the first atomic bomb, so it could be moved out and put on the aircraft and then dropped on Nagasaki and then Hiroshima. And this particular woman said, look, my grandmother lived to be 90-some. She had been at the atomic bomb site and then was moved to Roswell, and she was there when the crash happened near Roswell in 1947. And all she would ever say is that she absolutely knows that the ETs are real. That's all she would say. So, the family never knew anything else. This woman's grandmother passed away. And a few years later, they were going through the attic and picked up a book, and out falls a 5x10 photograph. And it's a photograph of some kind of humanoid being that we do not know from whence it came. And she was convinced it had to be one of the bodies from the Roswell event. And we started looking at it, and of course, being a doctor, I was looking at, I wasn't a doctor in 1947, but it didn't look quite right. I thought it looked more European. And then I enlisted the help of a number of people to research this. And Pat Pearsall here helped find Dr. Burns, who is the most renowned medical archivist in the world in New York. And he looked at it and he says, no, the medical garb, the setup, all of it isn't an autopsy. He wanted to be very scientific. It's a dissection of something from the 1920s. Between 1922 and 1929. Then we had a member of our team who has very good connections with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they have a whole division on clothing and eras and all that. They looked at, they said, absolutely, this is mid-1920s. So we're talking 20 to 25 years before Roswell. And what are we looking at here? Unfortunately, I'm not wired. I thought I would be, but I can't walk over to it. But you have, if you want to zoom in on the head and the body, oh dear. Oh boy. This is why I never touch a computer. Oh, it left. Well, he'll come back. See, I don't understand all this. Give me a big thing like this. But while he's bringing it back up, I will speak from this one. So you have what look like, military or intelligence civilians here, here, and here. You have medical personnel. This is the main doctor doing the dissection. This blob here is just damage on the emulsion. We had the paper tested, the original paper, because we had access to it. And the original paper is from early 50s. We know that. We also know that it's a photo of a photo, okay? And I'm just telling you what we know. I'm giving you the facts first, and I'm going to give you an educated assessment after. And it's a very unusual head and eyes. You can't see great detail, but you can see some. It's got a towel over it. Obviously, it had probably a lot of facial and neurotrauma. You can see the body cavity and the ribs, very unusual in how it's structured, almost like an external, these bumps on the outside, certainly not a normal human. And the hands and the feet and the legs. So we're dealing with something, that isn't a Homo sapien, a human. We don't know what it is. I'm not calling it an extraterrestrial at this point because we need more information, which is why I was given permission to disclose it to you today. And if it is what we think it is, in point of fact, one of the most important things ever to surface, because it predates Roswell by 2 decades or more. And it is also clearly some kind of formal operation going on, dissecting this. And now I have been told by a number of my contacts in the intelligence community who have been in the vault, as they call it, that there are files classified, still top secret, on this issue from the late 1800s and early 1900s. They never went through them, but they know that they were related to extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs going that far back. This is now 100 years ago. So I will pass this around and you're free to look at it. Those of you at home, you can zoom in and out as I now talk about my assessment. So I believe what happened, because I've been involved in a number of cases as a medical doctor, an emergency doctor, and forensic cases, that when the Roswell event happened, and this woman, Ms. Heaven is her name, was there at Roswell and had been at the atomic bomb project, she was cleared to a very high level of secrecy, even though she was doing a rather ordinary task as a seamstress. But when Roswell happened, if there was actionable intelligence and files in an archive on prior retrievals or events, those would have been couriered in so that they would have had a comparative anatomy and a comparative point of reference in studying the retrieval of the objects from the Roswell crash. What I think happened, now this we don't know, we're asking for the public to help, is that they needed these older files, and someone she knew who was probably in the photo lab at the Walker Field said, wow, look at this. And he took a picture of the picture and gave it to her, but she secreted it away until she died, and it fell out of a book. Now those are the facts that are known facts. It came from someone at Roswell, but it's not Roswell. It came from someone clear to the level of the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project, and to be at Roswell, which at the time, the 509th Bomber Squadron was the only place in the world that had atomic bombs in 1947. And yet it isn't that era. But that's even more explosive. It means these covert programs that have studied this issue go back much further. Now, what we're asking for specifically for the public, look at these men. People out there may have family pictures who will know who one of these people are. If we can identify one of them, then we can connect it further and begin to go deeper into what this really means. Or if you're in a classified project and have access to the vault, and you know who you are, contact me if you have any detailed information on this. I am telling you everything we know. Most of what we should know about this case, we have no idea. This was a serendipitous, strange thing that happened where these people we know the provenance of the photograph, we've tested it, we know it's from the 20s, we know that the woman in whose belongings it was found, who had deceased, was in fact at Roswell, we can prove it, and that she had been on the atomic bomb project. More than that, we don't know. I'm giving you an informed assessment of probably what this is. But we need the public. This is where we can crowdsource digging into this. And maybe someone has an answer that's very ordinary. I doubt it, not that particular being. So anyway, that is something that I think is a really important case. It's in development. We've hit a wall. The family and my team, we can't go any further without someone being able to tell us who any one of those people might be. And you may have a family album from your great-great-grandfather, whoever from the 20s, who would have been an adult then, because all those men are dead by now, obviously, who might know who they are. And from there, we might be able to connect them to an operation, an agency, a military branch, what have you. So that's what we're asking you guys to help us with. So what I want to do next is to show a number of clips of some interesting interviews.
Project Paperclip, most likely we got 5,000 or more scientists. I heard we got trainloads of paperwork, mature nonlinear physics experiments, Walter Gerlach's research, the death camp research. We got all that, as well as the Bell project, plasma accelerator, all that kind of stuff in that deal. My granddad and I, when we were talking, I'll never forget it. And he said, he was talking about Patton. And of course he said, I was in Czechoslovakia with Patton in April '45. And I thought, oh, that was neat. What did you do? And then he's like, well, Patton had to secure a lot of the stuff that the SS had. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And today we know it as the SSE-4 division under Hans Kammler, General Hans Kammler. And of course, Gestapo Müller also had 3 levels of security around that town, which was pretty dense. And of course, the SS we know today had their own funding streams. They were totally independent of the Reichstag. And a lot of that treasure in Switzerland, they had access to unlimited funds, right. Which sounds a lot like the deep state today. And so I said, what were you doing with Patton? He says, oh, it was interesting. Memory serves that Granddad told me they were with General Marshall, but I could be wrong on that. But I remember that he said he was with Patton, probably maybe Marshall, maybe some other generals. And they said, well, we went into this warehouse and there were all these exotic, jet aircraft, rocket engines, parts of the V2 and maybe a V3, I don't know. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he says, I saw a disc-shaped aircraft. And I said, I'd done some history work by that time. I said, oh, is that the one they built? I can't remember who built it, Arado or maybe someone else, that had the BMW jet engines and the Arado ones in a circle, and it didn't really work and everything like that. And he said, no. And that was it. It was time for lunch, the guests had arrived, the wine flowed, blah, 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 blah. And I went away as a college student. I was like, well, that's interesting. And it didn't hit me until I read Nick Cook's book, I think in 2004. And I was like, okay, this is getting really weird because, in 1993, when I was 31, I showed the Majestic 12 documents to my dad, and we went back and forth on that. And I said, I've heard of, Roswell and Pelona Peak and Corona. I've heard of some of these UFO crashes, but are these real? And he said, oh no, I checked with the Pentagon, the FBI, it's all hoax. And we went back and forth for months on this, and he finally said, look, just don't go down that road. He says, live your life, enjoy yourself, but don't, they have it all under control. They know what they're doing. And I said, Dad, how the hell can I live my life if this is the truth of our world.
So this disc in the warehouse, obviously we got it, and it ended up somewhere in the United States.
Probably Wright-Patterson, or Wright Field as they called it back then. I am not a documents expert, but I know 60s mimeograph sheets like you and I had in school. I mean,
Right.
they smell funny.
Yes.
He's a guy in my car club, and he was, in the Air Force. His father was a 3-star general in the Air Force. I'm not going to say his name. I promise I never would.
Yes, I understand that.
I mean, it's just my story, But he and I started talking about this, and he says, my wife and I have seen all kinds of strange phenomena. We've had, glowing Foo Fighters come into our home and, all this stuff. And he says, I want to show you something. And so his father left him a large safe that he said, well, I had to get my Navy SEAL buddy over here with some C4, and they blew the hinges off. And you can see where they blew the damn hinges off. I said, holy shit. And inside were Air Force documents with, disc craft and a lot of technical terms in German, which I thought was interesting. And he said, these were from 58 to 63, I think. And the dates were on them, and I recognized the terms, vortex compression, plasma accelerator, 0 point gravitational field, all this stuff. And the schematic had an Air Force serial number. And we were just flipping through them, hundreds of them. Now, these looked a lot like the German Haunebu ones, the Vril saucers, 3 maneuvering nodes underneath, powdered quartz with monatomic gold and insulators, torsion field maneuvering nodes that we know now. I figured that out. I actually sketched that out, a TR3B black triangle, how it worked with the plasma ring and the 3 nodes with monatomic gold and powdered quartz to Chris Mellon. And he's like, oh, wow, you and Tom DeLonge are into the wild stuff. I just shook my head and I was like, okay, whatever. But atomic weapons, and I'm sure you know this, Oppenheimer was famous for saying, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Correct.
Well, that's from the Vedic texts.
Yep.
And what he found out from the Vedic texts that the Ahnenerbe SS and all those Tula Society and everyone else and all the societies knew, and Rudolf Steiner and Gurdjieff probably knew, the Theosophists, was that when you light off a nuclear weapon of a certain yield, it not only affects the local battlefield at hand, but it rips through several dimensions of the universe, the local universe, and you get additional casualties. And that's why when we started, I think the Germans tested one in the Baltic in October of '44. I think that was true. The Navy did the Zinsser report on it. We go through these Yuga cycles, and all of a sudden it's like Atlantis again. We're starting to do, material science, regressive, actions, chimera construction with DNA, atomic weapons again, and scalar and free energy weapons, which can crack the Earth in half.
Correct. Dangerous stuff.
Dangerous stuff, As you said, firecrackers, but it's more than firecrackers. These kids are playing with C4 and they're 3 years old.
Yeah, they're 3-year-olds playing with C4.
Chunks of it as big as this table, enough to blow up an entire house. It's incredibly dangerous. And so Oppenheimer knew that. And the other person that worked with Oppenheimer at the Rad Lab at MIT, not only was Vannevar Bush, he was big time UFO file, was John G. Trump, the president's uncle.
Correct.
So that's how President Trump knew a lot about all this that we're talking about. It's because his uncle and he were close. And his uncle was read in along with Vannevar Bush and Oppenheimer and everybody on the Foo Fighter file, as it was known back then, and the German atomic program, our atomic program, the Klystron 2 scalar weaponry, radar research, and all that stuff at the Rad Lab. That was the Area 51, at MIT where the eggheads were, but Wright Field in Ohio was the place in those days. But that's something every American should understand is John G. Trump, because a lot of his physics work is still classified.
Yes.
Why?
Right. Yes.
I'm of the opinion they're given a very thin file to work from. And, Chris and I have met, we've talked about all this stuff. I think the TTSA program was a little goofy with Tom DeLonge. I don't know what, Hal Puthoff was wanting, soliciting me for funds for his quantum communication thing, which I think the Navy has had for 30 years. So there's a lot of disconnects going on. And of course, they've left that TTSP program, and I don't blame them. I think it was a shit show and some type of CIA, quasi-psyop something. And I don't think anybody was really excited about it. I was a little hard on him, and I will, because I was expecting much more disclosure after 4 years of this. And when they say, this is a mystery we need to solve, that is not true. As you and I know, the U.S. military, especially the Navy, has reams of information on every shape of craft, where it's from, who's driving it, what they're up to, Forget it. It's just been going on for 70 years. The military-industrial complex is not stupid. Neither are the branches of the military. They know exactly what's going on. And this Tic Tac, the word is, it's Lockheed Martin. It's the successor to the TR-3G Black Triangle model. And of course, there are stories by Charles Hall that the tall white ETs out at the Indian Springs, at the S4 and the Nellis Range, had these, lo and behold, these white Tic Tac looking things that they used as buses. And so I'm thinking, aha, maybe there's a connection there. And maybe that validates some of his story. And so when you start piecing all this together, I'm glad that they're doing something. But it's, Elizondo just will talk the bark off a tree. He goes in circles. He's a great counterintelligence guy. I'd love to get into a debate with him, but of course that's never going to happen. I think Chris means well. I really do. I don't think he's one of these guys, that's going around here, I'm going to fool the public and get paid for it. He doesn't need the money. I don't need money. We don't need fame or money. That's the last thing a melon wants. I'm telling you. We're very private as a family. I can pretty much guarantee you that. His brother was in the press a little bit, but, I think he sees this as a patriotic job. I think he believes that report is genuine and there's maybe not much more, and that he's okay with, this is what I'm allowed to talk about, and the rest of it is national security, and that cannot be talked about. They've lied by omission, and when they say it's a mystery, that's a lie. Okay, sorry, but that, I'm not on board with that, and that,
But they have to know that's a lie.
Right. So they do, and I think, it's obvious. So, that's why I'm giving this interview with you today. I mean, I've had enough of that. I had enough with my dad. Was he a liaison to Majestic 12 as a Magic member? Probably. He probably had 2 pages of the UFO file. Don't worry about the rest of it. Just need 2 pages are all you need. Okay, yes, sir. And Chris is going, yes, sir, too. Whatever factions in the Pentagon, as you know, everything is factions. Whatever factions they represent, it's like, well, we want to have disclosure, but not really real disclosure. And so they're slowing everything down. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why Chris is involved either, except, in my opinion, this is just me, I think there's a reason they picked a melon. Because we've had other families, this is a tradition in our family. As you said, the melons were the first family of intelligence. Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with that. Mm-hmm. From my, the people that I've talked to, that will go along with, we need to do this for the good of the country. Yes, you got to lie and do whatever you have to do, but this is what we need to do, and they'll just do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm a private citizen. I've never worked for the government or the military, right. But I'm not going to get up there. I'm not going to stay silent when members of my family lie to the American people. I won't do that. It's one thing for my dad, in the old days, to get up there and do some mild fibs about, highways. This is not. You're messing around with the survival capability of the human race.
Correct.
That's not an overstatement.
Right.
This is deadly serious. It's not funny.
Right. You're sort of half joking, but I thought you were somewhat serious that you said, a lot of my family are fascists, or were fascists, or fascist sympathizers. And you talk about that a little bit, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable.
Oh, there's no doubt. Andrew Mellon was upfront about it. He was Secretary of the Treasury under Harding and Hoover. He was ambassador to the court of St. James in 1931, a good friend of the royal family. That's where this Mellon royal family thing connection comes in. His outdated policies with Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, DuPont's, that made the Great Depression much worse, I believe. I've also heard that, he was heavily invested in DuPont's nylon, which came around in the late 30s for naval rope. And of course, hemp and marijuana were made strategic materials and therefore illegal. Of course, it was a war on consciousness too. Oh, we don't want people smoking those jazz cigarettes. That would be bad, And so, and of course, their dealings with Sullivan and Cromwell on Wall Street, the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Oh, invest in Nazi Germany. Hitler's a great guy. He's a Republican. Don't worry about it. You'll make lots of money. And then Standard Oil, through straw man in Portugal, all during the war. I mean, business thrives during war. You know that. It's a racket. And so, my grandfather wasn't the industrialist kind of war profiteer that Andrew was, but he was more into the mystic intelligence side for sure. And if you're bottom line, brass tacks, if you're on the CFR with Allen Dulles, you're in the Trilateral Commission, you're on the Jason Society, you're Scroll and Key at Yale, which Scroll and Key and the Skull and Bones are directly connected to the Tula Society of Germany and the Vril Society. And you're a Knight of the Order of Orange Nassau. You've got a KBE from the Queen. My dad does too. You're not a friend of the common American. You're just not. You're a very, neocon, ultra-conservative. I don't buy this whole, yes, he was a gentleman horse racer. He had a racing team of stables. He was, donated the National Gallery, the East Wing. His father donated the other National Gallery. These are things they did, in my opinion, so that the American people would put a gold wreath on their heads and go, what great oligarchs these guys are, billionaires, oligarchs. See what great things they do. Now, that's a great thing to do, to donate an art museum, but it's a great cover story. I mean, Andrew Mellon had intimate dealings with Hjalmar Schacht, who was Hitler's private banker. And so did Sullivan and Cromwell. I mean, this is dirty, nasty history. And it doesn't make, it took me years really to gather all the intelligence bits and to come up, a lot of it I'm connecting dots on my own, but they make sense to me given my German history and the history of the military-industrial complex and everything, and why the Mellons are so active still. And, secrecy and big money and these big American families, some call them the Committee of 300. That's probably a loose term, but, I've never heard it, but, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I've had that confirmed, that it is
Yeah.
a committee around 300 that are involved in these operations. And it's not just extraterrestrial UFO, it's a whole lot of aspects of technology, finance, global, geopolitical.
My friend who was an ONI Navy captain, we had a dinner one night and he said, I said, what can you tell me? And he spent 30 years in the ONI, and he said, well, we're pretty proud of our satellites. We're competing with the Air Force, and they're two-man satellites. We've got our own two-man satellites. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And they have scalar weaponry, and he was like, well, I can't comment to that. More wine. And he said, I said, tell me about your tracking systems. And he says, oh, that's I love that. And he's like, we can track those bastards, UAPs. UFOs, punching in and out superluminal, and we can track them 25 miles under the Earth.
Under the Earth.
Or the ocean.
Yes. And tell me a little bit about Mount Weather. You use that. I think a lot of people don't know why that was important at that time.
The official narrative is that Mount Weather was built in the Blue Ridge during the Kennedy administration as a continuance of government, COG. And I think it still is. My dad's been down under there. My dad also tells me about the high-speed train they have, because during 9/11, he told me that, I said, because I was out of touch with him for 5 days, he said, well, they had us out DC to an undisclosed location. It wasn't Mount Weather, it was in West Virginia, in 7 minutes. And I said, oh, is that the maglev train that goes Mach 2 in a vacuum tube? And, oh, well, how did you know that? My dad always wonders how I know this stuff. But Mount Weather, the rumors are that it goes down, probably a mile or two down to the sub-shuttle system and connects to other deep underground military bases. Why else it's in the Blue Ridge in that specific location, I'm not sure. But it's a top secret facility. It's still very active and expanding. And if they're expanding on the surface, as you know, they're probably expanding tenfold beneath the surface.
Right, correct. Yep. Had your grandfather, Paul Mellon, been in Mount Weather?
Oh, I'm sure. But he never told me that.
Right.
I don't remember that as part of our conversation. But certainly that's all connected with his jet strips and his meetings and Mount Weather. These are all connected things. For all I know, there's a tunnel from his farm to Mount Weather. I mean, I have no idea, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were true. And I don't take pleasure in any of this. This family history is very disturbing and actually disheartening for me.
Were there human pilots on board? Or
I never saw it land, so I don't know. I don't
Did
know
you
if
ever
there was
meet an Air Force pilot who piloted them?
only the Cash-Landrum. I actually interviewed him.
Oh, you
Or
did?
there were 4 of them. I mean, the two pilots. There was a systems officer that was handling the equipment, and then there was I can't remember what the 4th person did. He was a navigator or what he was, and I interviewed them, and everything that could have gone wrong. It took off fine from Nevada and flew perfectly, but when
Where was it headed?
it was going to an airbase. I can't remember which airbase it was. Some airbase in Texas. I think it was Webb Air Force Base in Big Springs. I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Webb. And when they tried to slow it down, that's when the problems happened. And then they cut power, and so many things went wrong that they almost crashed. They called for rescue helicopters. They thought it were going to crash. So these helicopters came out, but they finally got it going again, and they landed at some place. Apparently, it was just past where they spurred all this radiation on those 2 or 3 people, or however many it were, and then they flew it back to Nevada. It was pretty huge. It was one of those big ones. It was not a saucer shaped. It was more huge oval shape.
Was it
And
man-made?
It was reverse engineered.
Reverse engineered, yes.
They trained 9 months before they ever flew it. And then they trained another, I can't remember how long, 4 or 5 months, flying it all around Nevada. And it worked fine. But the problem is it's a reverse engineered alien craft with one of our nuclear propulsion systems. That wasn't refined because they couldn't figure out how to reverse engineer the aliens. They got it to work at times, but they couldn't manipulate it the way they needed to for a human pilot to fly it. So they had to put one of our propulsion system in it, and it malfunctioned. And they trained, and there wasn't any. The pilot told me they were flying, and everything seemed. They were flying at a high altitude. I can't remember what altitude it was. Flying perfectly fine, no problems whatsoever, until they slowed down. He said, and then hell broke loose. Then the system just malfunctioned, and they had this something that was supposed to throw thrust, but the thruster was moving all around, and they had a filter, some kind of filter that was supposed to filter. That didn't work. That didn't come down, and it was just a mess.
Do you know what kind of velocities this craft reached?
It could go Mach 1. And I that's all I was told. I mean, maybe probably more than that, but just what he told me, what the pilot told me when I interviewed him was he had it up to Mach 1.
It sounds like a hybrid craft. It had some aspects of the ET craft and others
Yeah.
of the conventional.
Yeah, the body and everything was ET. The only thing that was propulsion was it was us, with American or conventional, or actually a nuclear and it just didn't work.
And there were 4 humans.
Yeah, four humans in it. And none of them suffered any radiation problems. It's just those poor people on the ground.
A couple of nuclear weapons sent into space were destroyed by the extraterrestrials. In talking to various contacts throughout, they would allude to the fact that these did happen. There was, for example, the missile, Minuteman missile, which destroyed the launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base. That's now a public matter of record. The one incident, for example, was they actually photographed the UFO following the missile as it climbed into space and shining a beam on it, which neutralized the missile. And that is their major concern, is to preserve the integrity of the Earth, because it affects their own system. Well, there was one incident when we exploded a nuclear weapon over the Pacific, and this was in about '61, I believe. And the consternation that it caused, because it shut out communications entirely over the Pacific Basin for a number of hours in which no radio transmission was available at any time. And this was very significant, and of course, this was one of the things that the extraterrestrials later, I learned, were highly concerned about, because it affected our ionosphere. And in fact, spacecraft were unable to operate because of the pollution in the magnetic field of which they depended upon. The very end of the 70s or the early 80s, we attempted to put a nuclear weapon on the moon and explode it for scientific measurements and other things, which was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials.
And what happened?
They destroyed the weapon before it got to the moon. With reference to the incident which our government sent a nuclear weapon for explosion on the moon's surface, it was tended to, as I understand it, to assess some scientific data and reaction and so forth. The idea of any explosion in space by any Earth government was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials, and that has been demonstrated over and over.
And what's the consequence? How is that demonstrated?
By the destruction of any nuclear weapons sent into space.
In 1979, I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind and got very emotional at the very end when there was that contact. If you remember Francois Truffaut that met the beings at the very end. And I was a teacher, like Carol. I taught high school for 40 years, and I have a master's in education. So I'm always going to talk about reading and getting educated. So what happened is I was at a wedding in Evanston, Illinois. I walked into the Center for UFO Studies, and by coincidence, Alan Hynek was there. And I went up to him and I said, "Is this real? Is this, what I saw in that movie, was that real?" And he said, yes. He was working on Project Blue Book at the time. And he said, yes. He said, "I heard you speak Italian." And I said, "I do." And he said, "Would you help me? Would you help me with the Italian sightings? I'm going to send you some boxes full of letters I'm getting from all over the world." So I was lucky. Whoever gave me this assignment gave me the best teacher. How can you have any better teacher than Alan Hynek, who's an astronomer and a scientist? So I'm dealing with real science, and working with Alan, that's a very young Paula Harris there, taught me to listen. It taught me to listen, put together facts, do not make judgments, and collect the material. Okay, next. And you can see he had a sense of humor. And I think we need one. I'm so overloaded by what I've heard and what I've seen. And Alan said, "Laugh, laugh, study, study. Let's not forget our sense of humor here." And I miss him so much because I worked with him for 6 years. And he taught me a lot. Go ahead. Okay. What happened in I think it was 1999, was that Stephen Greer came to Italy, and he asked me to help them with the disclosure project, which meant we rented a room near the train station in Rome, and we filed all these military people in, and they gave testimony. We filmed it. And then he asked me to meet Monsignor Corrado Balducci of the Vatican, who made the statement, the next one. There's Monsignor Balducci with Stephen. He said, the devil doesn't need UFOs. And this is very important, because one of the problems that I thought at that time that had to do with disclosure was that it had to do with the downfall of religions or people panicking and so forth. And he said, no, he actually said, I'm a demonologist. This has nothing to do with the devil. Believe it or not, in Roswell, once they put me on a panel to talk about the devil. And I said to these were engineers. And I said, why are you doing that? And they said, wouldn't you rather believe in Jesus Christ than aliens? I said, are you out of your minds? This is not about religion. So get a clue. And if you attribute it to the box of religion, then we will never learn the truth. Wouldn't it be great if we could learn we had friends out there? If this planet was not the only one? If there is a civilization that's more evolved? And that is what Balducci said. He told Stephen, he said, look, we're the bottom of the barrel. He said, in all these years, we have not evolved. He said, they're watching us and trying to get us to a point where we understand how amazing we are and how filled this universe is with life. And we're just part of it. And of course I had to interpret because he didn't speak English very well. But I want you to understand, there's Zacharias Sitchin with Monsignor Balducci. I took the photo. The photos, I take them because I'm a photojournalist. So I'm going to take the photos of the history of this, because this dates back for me from 1980. Go ahead, the next one. So these are some of the things that Monsignor Balducci said. Catholicism, he said, this is very important, you have to understand this, is based on witness testimony. The whole religion, the apostles and so forth. Why aren't we believing the witnesses to the UFO phenomenon if we've created a whole religion around witness testimony? He said, see, my talk today is more on logic and ethics. That's logical. All the witnesses, what do you need? Not only military, which Stephen has filed in, all these military, credible scientists, but there's people out there that have witnessed this phenomena. This should also be taken seriously. The next one. There's Stephen on the stage in Barcelona, and there is the orb that appeared. Who took that picture? I did. I had to because it was a historic conference. Those people were really interested, and most of the people there, except Javier Sierra, who was the moderator, were American. And Bob Dean was there. If you remember Robert Dean, he was with us. Yes, go ahead. Okay, so my book, Conversations with Colonel Corso, will give you a word-by-word conversation with him. In other words, what it is all of audio tapes that I took while I was working with Corso. But I'm going to tell you a story about this. I don't know, do we have the Corso clip for, let's play that for them. Because I'll tell you what happened with Colonel Philip Corso. You need to know the real story. Sometimes I feel I am the voice of people who are no longer here.
Right today,
Right.
people hear these things.
Right.
We don't know what the humanoid clone, what advancements he can make or how we can make one. So what you have to do, you can't go to the library and get reference books on how he was built. You can't go any place and find this information. You have to start from zero. It's a new science. I've told you the answer. You have to start from zero and promote a new science. That's what you people have to do. And not only that, I tell you, I'll promote a new science. I'm going to only give you a little bit of help. You have to do the rest yourselves. And if you can't carry it on.
Colonel, but humans could turn into robots with this new science. How do we
You know what, Dr. Mari, what I told him and he agreed? Okay. And my own doctor? This would be a great boon for mankind if we could give man new muscles, new bones, new organs. Do you realize what that would bring to mankind?
What?
That's what this thing did. Jeez, medical science is coming. Look at the new advances in medical science that we can make.
This man changed my life, and he also changed ufology, and I'll tell you the reason. Okay, here's the books in Italian on Colonel Corso. My book's in French. Go ahead and put the, okay. Here is his background. You could read it. The head of intelligence at the age of 28 in Rome. I could verify all that because I dragged him around Rome and he verified everything. Go ahead. Here we are in Rome. Go ahead. Stop here. In 1997 was the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash. My boss sent me to look for Colonel Philip Corso. He said, the book the day after Roswell came out, Paula, you need to cover this. I was in Italy. I did not want to come. I had other things I wanted to do. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with him. I got to, but there were some people that could drive me there. Once I got here and I got to Roswell, it was a big party. There was all the major UFO people, and Colonel Corso was there, and I didn't know what he looked like, but I went to the where he was having a press conference, and a blonde man pushed me into the crowd and said, you have to speak to my father in Italian. I said, who are you? And he said, I'm Colonel Corso's son. And I asked Colonel Corso about the Santilli footage, the alien autopsy in Italian. And he answered, and he said, that seems real. He said, because that lens, now remember, little gray aliens that we see, that we have these big eyes. He said, that was a lens, he said, and we pull that off. He said, we engineered night screening devices from it. And he told everybody. Colonel Corso could not speak in this country for the jealousy and the court case against his book. So we promptly pulled him to Italy, and he testified on 2 different occasions in Pescara and the independent Republic of San Marino. Now, when I tell you this, I'm telling you that sometimes our own people stop our own people from testifying, because it was very, very interesting that he spoke in Italy. So this is the autopsy of the ETs. And it's in the book, Conversations with Colonel Corso. Now go ahead, keep going, we'll go really fast. Here we are in Rome. I brought him to Europe. This is a conversation. He told me that I had to talk about this. And I said, I can't do this. And he said, you'll learn, you're a soldier. And I'm a woman, I'm going, what do you mean you'll learn? I'm a soldier. He said, after I'm gone, you must talk about this. Go ahead. Here we are, go ahead. All right, so from that point of view, I heard that the former defense minister had read Corso's book, had called some military men here, and what this man said was, I verify what Corso said about back engineering and more. And when I realized what this was really about, I realized that's what the secret was. It wasn't people were going to panic. This is about creating back engineering. Go ahead. Now, this is the story that Stephen has been talking about. When we detonated the atomic bomb, somebody noticed. So that 1947 Roswell, which has become a party if you go there, was not the first crash. It was 1945, go ahead. It was in San Antonio, New Mexico. Two little boys, Remy Baca and Jose Padilla, were looking for a cow that was calving and that had a calf. And what had happened is they watched a UFO come in, hit a radio tower, and actually crash. A piece of it fell off and they saw the beings inside. This is a case I've been covering for the last 9 years. It really happened. I believe that the files on this are in the Atomic Energy Commission files and not on the Blue Book files. Go ahead. And here's Jose and here's Remy. One is 9, one is 6. They're children. They're telling the truth. This really happened. I did an interview for Stephen that you'll see in the documentary of the details of this. This is important because it was 1 month after the atomic bomb. So these ETs, this civilization, were not on vacation. This was a statement to planet Earth. The boys saw the creatures. They stayed there for at least 20 to 25 minutes and watched it. Go ahead. Now, why is that important? Because at that time, and there's Oppenheimer, and I heard the testimony, I am death, the killer of worlds, which is what that Trinity plaque is near the site there, 13 miles from where this crash was. I am death. I have created death, the killer of worlds, plural. Oppenheimer is having a conversation with Einstein. Go ahead. Protocols were discussed. Oppenheimer and Einstein said, we got problems here. You think Oppenheimer that wasn't there didn't know about this crash? It was 1 month after the atomic bomb. Go ahead. There is a document, MJ12 document. It's called Relationships with Inhabitants of Celestial Bodies. It's an MJ12 document. There it is. You can go on Ryan Wood's website and read it. And what it says basically, go ahead. What it says is, hey, President Truman, we got problems. We're having visitations because something happened. And this is a month after the atomic bomb. And it says, we've got to do something. The United Nations cannot cover this. We're going to create a supra-United Nations. He calls them cosmic cultures. There is no hint of hostility. This document, you should go on Ryan Wood's website and look at it, relationships with celestial bodies, and it calls them cultures. And in the UFO field, all you see is a little gray alien. We got to understand that there were also people from other planets coming here. In fact, Colonel Corso said, we weren't worried about the clone. We were worried about who created them. Because those things can fly in outer space, but there are actual, cultures that created them. Go ahead. This is Adamsky, and it's very important because people, my colleagues especially, just completely canceled George Adamsky. When I started listening to his audio tapes, Adamsky was addressing all world leaders because in 1952, November 20th, 1952, the message from Orthon, and there's his footprints done by George Hunt Williamson, plaster casts of his shoes. If you would go back to the Adamsky era, we were on a timeline like we are today, where Adamsky said, look, Orthon that came off the ship said, this planet is run on a war economy. And if you keep doing this, you have to create the wars. But Kennedy wanted to go out into outer space. Orthon says, look, if you guys change the war economy to a space economy, the spinoffs from the space economy will give you enough money to still have an economy, but you'll get to meet us. That is the message of George Adamsky. If you bother to go back and do some scholarly study of ufology, get his audio tapes. He went to the Queen of Denmark, to the Queen of England, all over the world. And the irony is, when I went to speak to people that knew him, the ETs would go in the car with him. The ones that look like us. And it's very, very interesting. Go ahead. Okay, so the message of George, that's the message written. We'd have to create the wars. Well, guess what we chose? We're out of enemies, so I don't know. Now we have to go into something else. Okay, go ahead. There is Colonel Corso speaking to Desmond Leslie, who wrote the books on Adamsky. I was listening to the conversations. I'd sit there at dinner and listen to Desmond Leslie go, on about meeting George Adamsky and what he said. Go ahead. There I am with Dr. Edgar Mitchell. It's time to tell the truth. He said, we are not alone and they are not hostile, or we would have conflicts a long time ago. Look, if they were going to bomb us, they would have bombed us. Or if they were going to attack us, they would have attacked us when we became a threat. Now, there's an agenda behind everything. God bless Edgar Mitchell, because he was, like you guys, a hero. And because it cost him a lot to come out and talk about UFOs, but basically he had an epiphany when he was in outer space and felt the consciousness rise. Go ahead. There's Edgar Mitchell and me and Roswell. Go ahead. Now, here we go. Clifford Stone just died February 12th. And I had his book published, but Clifford Stone has a message for you. He did 12 crash retrievals, 3 of them in Vietnam. His first crash retrieval, he didn't know it. I can't go into detail about this, but when he was picked to do this, he was 18 years old. His first crash retrieval was at Indiantown Gap, Indiana in 1969. He had courage enough to speak at your disclosure conference, and the agenda for Colonel Corso was his 3 grandsons. He wanted them to know that it was real. It was not about making money, doing Roswell books or whatever. His agenda was that his son was killed. He had twin sons. His son Robert was killed. That was the impetus to come forward at your disclosure project. And these heroes have an agenda for the knowledge of mankind. The agenda of today is not that. Go ahead. And he just died, and he said he had a first aid manual with 57 different species in it. And guess what? Our field has reptilians, grays, and Nordics. And we got 57 different species. And so we play the reptilians, grays, and Nordics, and we try to shove. There are cosmic cultures out there that are interested in coming here to watch the evolution of mankind. And they are not reptilians, grays, and Nordics. Go ahead. This is Wilbur Smith, who said that this subject matter, that the visitation to the earth is classified higher than the atomic bomb. Go ahead. So we're getting to the end. Why would I ever do this? I started as nuts and bolts with Alan Hynek putting pins in maps for sightings. And it took me this long to look at why this was happening. This is a phenomena that is created. Go ahead, the next one. This is a phenomenon that is created to raise the level of consciousness of this planet, because if we don't grow up, the repercussions are horrible. Go ahead. Here's Colonel Corso and me in Europe. He had a piece of metal with atoms aligned. He only spoke in Europe. What happened here? Our own people, 2 researchers went after him. So he could not speak here. Go ahead. There we are. And he said, I had a bunch of fiber optics. Okay, the next one. Paul Hellyer, former defense minister. Everybody laughed at him. He felt he needed to talk. He is not somebody off the street. And there's Al Gore, and Carol talked about ecology, and he had courage to talk about, an inconvenient truth. Go ahead. And there they are. The release of these technologies could change the planet. This isn't just about UFO disclosure. This is about changing the order of the planet. In other words, if these technologies were released, if we could learn to not look at the borders, we are looking at the United States, China, Russia. when Edgar Mitchell was in outer space, his famous quote that I love is he grabbed, he said, I'm going to grab one of those Congress people. He said, I see the little beautiful blue circle that's the planet, and say, hey, you son of a bitch, where are the borders there? This is a quote from Edgar Mitchell, astronaut, Apollo 14. There are no borders to fight for. There is no, humanity is humanity. I'm Italian, but I'm human first. And I think we've got to do something here. We've got to redefine humanity. We are humans, we all have children, we all want this planet to survive. For me, the message is, this is it. Okay, the next one. This, we have a problem. Stephen just did 2 hours of this, our stuff or their stuff. Go ahead. And then the message from Warthon was that we could go to a space-based economy instead of a war economy, the next one. So when Colonel Corso had his encounter in the desert, Colonel Corso told me, this is the first interview you gave me. And I said, I'm not printing this. They're going to think you're nuts. I can't do it. He told me that he had an encounter in the desert with a being because a craft had landed. He had seen it from the sky. This being came out of a cave in White Sands. And Colonel Corso, being Italian, he had a stiletto in his boot, but he had a gun and he pointed it at the being and he said, friend or foe? And he said, Paula, guess what he said? I said, he said neither. He said neither. There are no good aliens or bad aliens, like there are no good people or bad people. They just are. But look at the agendas. And then the being said, do you want to come aboard? And Colonel Corso said, what do you have to offer me? A new world if you could take it. The last words of the CE5 movie. A new world if you can take it, to me is not a hostile statement. And I bless you for putting that in your CE5 movie, because that being knew we were going to do this today. He knew. Do you understand? There was no time. So whatever you're doing today, that being knew you were going to do it. Okay, go ahead. He said, Paula, a new world will dawn for you and you will be in the forefront. This is Colonel Philip Corso. I didn't know what he was talking about because I've learned so much since then. Go ahead, the next one. I leave you with a question. When what you think disclosure comes out, look where it comes out from and look what the agenda is. Please use your brains. Please use logic. And then maybe we can get through this together. And I thank you so much.
So we'll be having more information about this case in 1945. We did an extensive interview on that. And one of the things that was an interesting correlation is that those children picked up just bags of these angel hair-like filaments that they decorated their Christmas trees, and then the whole town got them, and it turned out they were fiber optics. And of course, Corso talks about the fact that in the 1947 crash and others, they had retrieved these filaments. You put a light at one end, and it would transmit it. So much of the technology, interestingly, that's information systems have come out. What have they held back? The things that need to save the planet. Energy, propulsion. Instead of these advanced sciences, we're using oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, which should have been retired 100 years ago, what I call the lost century. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce a very good friend of mine. He's a renowned civil rights and constitutional attorney, Daniel Sheehan. Of course, you all know that he did the Pentagon Papers representing the New York Times. He also did the Silkwood case, nuclear case. He's done many civil rights cases, the KKK case in Greensboro and others, but he's worked with us since the 1990s and early 2000s as a constitutional advisor and attorney who's very accomplished and was part of how we came to the assessment that the national security state operations that are unacknowledged special access projects are in fact breaking the law. They're illegal and they're rogue, and therefore all the witnesses and all the material we have that have come from classified sources, we have been able to bring out to the public with impunity. And to this date, no one has challenged that assessment. So I'd like to welcome Daniel Shin.
Well, I have the good fortune of getting you while you're totally exhausted. And so this is sort of the closing argument, if you will, of the day. We've covered an awful lot of different subjects here, kind of different strands that you've seen. There's like a whole dozen different things that we've talked about. And what I want to do is I just want to kind of bring it together here, sort of at the end of the day, and try to be clear about what the implications are of what we're talking about here. That we know that one of the fundamental questions that we've got, that we all share, is whether or not an actual other intelligent civilization exists, an extraterrestrial civilization of another intelligent and highly technologically developed, but categorically distinct species, or one or more exist. And this is a fundamental question that has brought us all together. I think that basically the reason we're all here together is because we have had a different kind of unique response to standing out under the stars. You know, when we look up into the nighttime sky and see a star pulsing in the distance, we have, since we've been small children, experienced that as an existence of another star with other planets and other beings, and that we've had a deep kind of overwhelming sense that what we're doing here in our day-to-day lives is not in harmony with that reality. That we've got this kind of bizarre reductionist view of reality, that we end up, drawing, lines in the sand and threatening to kill someone if they come onto our property, and use our intelligence to sort of dig into the earth and dig up the minerals and develop bullets and weapons to do that. And it is so incongruous with this dimension of reality that we have known about and experienced since we were children. And so that ultimate question, we have, I think, had an answer to that in our own conscience since we've been small. And that it's baffling that other people have not acknowledged this. The schools we go to, the churches we go to, the political parties that we all participate in have never wanted to acknowledge that. They stay completely fixated on this kind of reductionist view of reality. So this is one of the most important issues that we're dealing with now. And we've crossed, I think, into a new era on that within our own lifetimes. Some of our lifetimes are a little longer than others here. But I remember distinctly when I first raised this issue, when I was legal counsel at the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., that I was there when, as many of you may have heard about, is I got contacted by the Congressional Research Service, Science and Technology Division. They've been asked by President Carter to prepare two classified reports, one on the existence of extraterrestrial life, and the second one on whether or not at least some of these UFO encounters might actually represent vehicles from another civilization, an extraterrestrial civilization. And I was contacted by Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, and asked whether I, as legal counsel at the Jesuit National Headquarters Office of Social Ministry, whether I would be able to get access to the Vatican library for the study and secure the information they had on these two subjects. And I brought it to Father Bill Davis, who was my immediate superior. I was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood at the time. And I went to Father Davis and explained to him why I thought this was so extraordinarily important that we ought to respond to this in a positive way. And he convened the assistant provincials for all 10 provinces in the United States who were in charge of social ministry, and we got their consent to doing this. And that's an extraordinarily important step that took place there with the largest single order of the Catholic Church, the largest single denomination in all of Western civilization, to agree that we would take the step of going forward and trying to get the Vatican to provide this information. And that was when I first became involved as a grown-up, actually, and a professional in trying to do something about this. And that's how it started. And so I became counsel to the special counsel to the investigation and study for the president, and ended up being therefore invited to go to talk with the top scientist in SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to deliver a closed door seminar to them on the theological implications of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, which it turns out they had been seriously concerned about, as it turns out there at SETI. So I said, well, look, just let me ask you this then. Whatever the nature of this tribunal might be, can you tell me whether either or both of the following questions are going to be at issue here, as a matter of fact? Number one, whether or not another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species exists in extraterrestrial life here. And secondly, whether at least some of these vehicles that are seen around in the UFO phenomenon might actually be a vehicle from another civilization, an extraterrestrial civilization. Relman, who was the chairman, said, well, absolutely, those two issues are at stake here. And it's totally ridiculous for anybody to believe either one of those things is true. Now, this is Harvard University in 1994 is making that type of declaration, right? And from between that time in 1994 and then in 2009, at that whole period of time, it turns out that you have the Vatican, the Jesuit order, convening a gathering of world scientists to come to the Vatican, to Castel Gandolfo, where the papal observatory is, spending a whole week briefing the cardinals on what the developments are. And they come out and they go to the Vatican and deliver an official statement on the part of the Roman Catholic Church, saying that in light of the discovery of more and more of these new planets, these exoplanets, that it now appears that much sooner than we'd anticipated, that we're going to discover that there's life elsewhere in our universe. And therefore, the time has arrived for the beginning of a very serious conversation among our human family about the philosophical and theological implications of this discovery. And so that's an official statement from the Roman Catholic Church here in Western civilization. And so now we have the situation where the United States Pentagon is announcing, basically on the front pages of the New York Times, that yes, the UFOs are real. They're real. And yet you hear this bizarre response from them all saying, but we can't figure out what they are. We don't know what this really is. And so that we've heard the information today about what the potential implications of that type of a situation is, what those implications are. That they know that they're not Russian. They know that they're not Chinese. So we have a couple of questions in front of us here that we really need to take away from our discussion today, and all the thousands of people that are listening to this out around the world, is that there are some pivotal questions here. We now know that the institutions of the major Catholic Church in Western civilization are taking the position that it's now clear that there's extraterrestrial life now for the very first time. Now the Pentagon is acknowledging that UFOs are real. The question that we have in front of us here, and the evidence is starting to roll in on this, is has the United States government come into physical possession of any of these vehicles? And there's ample evidence now that is perfectly clear that we've come into possession of some of these, right? And there are particular instances that we all talk about of Roswell and the 1945 crash and the others. And the next question is there any evidence that we are engaged in some effort to duplicate these, to back engineer and generate these things so that we would end up having access to this technology? And there's growing evidence that they clearly have been trying to do this. So the big question here that you've gotten posed to you today with evidence that you may not have heard in the past, one of the pivotal questions is, have they succeeded in doing this? Or are they still trying to do it? Like, you know, in the deep background interviews, yeah, we haven't been able to do it. Yeah, you're right. You caught us. We got some of these vehicles and we've been trying to do it, but we haven't really been able to do it yet. You know, so that fact question is one that's pivotal. If you were a jury and you had to try to decide when you go back into the jury room to try to figure out the answers to these questions, you have to ask yourself, is there evidence now that is going to cause you to be convinced that we have, in fact, some of us in this country, in some governing elite circles, have actually mastered the technology so that we're actually flying these things around? So that we now are confronted, all of us in this room and people that are listening around the world are actually confronted for the first time in our life with, if we were out on a dark, starry night and a big UFO came around and landed in the field like this, we would, instead of saying, fantastic, great, I feel like Betty and Barney Hill, I'm getting set to be able to go and meet people from an extraterrestrial civilization. And you find out they're US military people. I mean, what a bummer that is, you know? I mean, what a bummer. I mean, these people are messing with our life ambitions of getting to have that experience. And here we are dealing with guys in camouflage or something. So we need to be able to answer that question, okay? And if we answer that question, that they have developed the technology and they are flying around and presenting themselves, and they know perfectly well that the response that our people are having is, oh my God, great, their UFOs are here, that we can see them. We finally get we know that they're doing that. The second question that is posed to us here today in our discussions is, why in the world are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Why haven't they revealed this technology? Why are they spending hundreds of billions of dollars building big rocket ships, you know, to put people in capsules and send them up under rockets to go to the moon, and multi-billion-dollar programs that they're lauding and praising and getting us all cheering them going up into space with these gigantic flames rolling out of the bottom of their rocket, you know, and blowing up people in the Challenger and getting people killed, you know. I mean, why are they doing that? If that second question is answered that way, that yes, they've mastered the technology, and yes, they're flying around, and they know they're giving us all the impression that these are UFOs. So that question is posed. The third question was, why in the world would they be doing that? These are the three questions we brought to you today. You know, that have they mastered the technology? And if they have, are they flying it around and giving us the impression that they're UFO people all around? And why are they keeping us from having this technology? Why is that? Who are these people that are doing this? And these are the three fundamental questions that have been posed to us here today. And I know that for long periods of time, I've been, I'm counsel to the Disclosure Project and counsel to the Citizens Disclosure and counsel to the Jesuits and have been counsel to John Mack. I've been doing this over all the years now. And now I'm counsel to you. You know, trying to make it clear what the clear questions are that you need to ask, and figure out yourself, along with all of us as a community, what the answers to these questions are. Because we're faced with a very serious situation right here, where there are people in good faith that have devoted their lives to this, who believe that these people are engaged in trying to set up a hoax, a false apparent invasion or incursion of some sort on the part of an extraterrestrial civilization to try to get our human family, led by the United States ruling elite, to view all extraterrestrials as a horrible threat, and to establish this meme in our minds for the next 5,000 years in the future. This is an extraordinarily important period of time in all of our lives, in the lives of our whole human family. This is going to determine how our relationship is established with the extraterrestrial civilization that we all are convinced exists, and that we all have to deal with this. We all have to try to figure out how to raise our personal consciousness. We have to learn how to raise the consciousness of our religious institutions. We have to be able to raise the consciousness of our governing institutions. And the bottom line is we have to learn to raise the consciousness of ourselves as citizens, as individuals, and know that this is a key thing that we have to do. Because the fact of the matter is that we have to merit our relationship with the extraterrestrial civilization. Because as you might well imagine, they've got some fundamental questions about the worthiness of our whole species. And there's a lot of evidence that raises fundamental questions about this. And we've all gone along through our lives, some more or less, ignoring that challenge that we all have, to somehow participate in the process of helping to raise the consciousness of our human community here. But the fact of the matter is, the issue is now put to us in some pretty stark terms, because we have now, for the first time, you've got, Mark Rubio, who was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, asking for a full briefing from the Office of Naval Intelligence now on what their position is about this phenomenon. And we know that the person who's the executive director of that new UAP, task force inside the Office of Naval Intelligence has told them in closed door sessions that the majority of his staff believe that these are off-world vehicles. That's what he has said. Okay? And so that we've got to deal with the fact that there are low consciousness political structures of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee, yes, low consciousness institutions, who are now in the process of thinking how to respond institutionally to that type of a communication. And there are people inside the military who are trying to tell them that this constitutes a threat, because they find it in their institutional interest to be able to get billions and billions of dollars of more tax money so they can have more jobs. Now this is extremely low consciousness functioning here. So our question is how can we, as a community, as a portion of our human family, mobilize from this moment here onward to try to help raise our entire consciousness on this subject, so that we can, in fact, become the messengers of an alternative way of approaching this whole thing. And as you know, the medium is the message to a large extent. We can't be hostile, we can't be antagonistic, we can't be accusatory, we can't be confrontational. And so we've got to be able to think about these things ourselves. And what it really comes down to is we have to answer for ourselves the profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our whole human family, which are posed to us as well. And that's the discussion that we need to inspire. And that's what we're trying to do here this weekend, is to encourage this conversation among ourselves, so that it's no longer just some of us who devoted 50 years or more to this to come and talk with you and give you the information and stuff. The fact is, this has to be a collective activity on our part now. We have to respond to the call to figure out what the philosophical and theological implications are and internalize our own answers to those things and go forward as messengers of this, you know. And at the minimum, we have to move very aggressively to stop the shifting of weapons up into space. We've just come out of an administration that is now actively advocated and set up a U.S. Space Force, a military space force to go into outer space and to bring weapons and to try to establish full spectrum dominance up over the planets in our solar system. And we know that that's what they're trying to do. So we've got to roll that back. We've got to roll back. That's brand new. It's only been here for a matter of months, right? We need to roll that back as best we can, and we need to go forward to help support the setting up of this treaty on the part of the nation states of our planet to ban the movement of weapons into space, first by banning the basing of any weapons in outer space, but also later prohibiting even the carrying of any of these weapons into space. You know, and I don't think that we need to emphasize the fact that the extraterrestrial civilization isn't going to allow us to do it, because that's only going to inspire fear and antagonism and a dialectical perception of the extraterrestrials. What we have to do is we have to make that argument ourselves. We have to make that argument to our own fellow citizens and everybody that we shouldn't be doing this, that we can't be doing this. We cannot start our next thousands of years of experience with the extraterrestrial civilization on that footing. That we just can't do that. And so that's my attempt to try to draw it together for us to realize what the takeaway is from the beginning of our time here together, you know. But there's a whole set of discussions that we have to have, you know, among ourselves. It's not just a matter of us standing up here talking to you. It's a matter of you talking to us talking to each other, us talking to ourselves, you know, of what we're going to do about this, because this is a very serious situation. I've been in a lot of serious situations down through the years, you know, having people come to say, oh, having Jim Goodell of the New York Times legal counsel call me and say, Danny, you know, I got to have a meeting with you right away. By the way, we've got 47 volumes of top secret classified Pentagon papers. What are we going to do with them? You know, which I said to him, the only thing you need to decide is how big the font should be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow morning. You know, but this is another situation. And I want to tell you that in every one of these situations, there's a small group of people who have to make some very serious decisions to change history here. To change history, not just to make history, because there's a momentum going now in the wrong direction here. So we've got to make history here. We've got to change the history that will happen without us. Okay, and this includes all the other people that are listening here today. Okay, and that's what our discussions are going to be for the rest of the time we're here, for these next few days together, to how we go about doing this. This is a practical question about a theological and philosophical issue. So that's what I would like to say.
And just for those who, he didn't go through all of it, but he was actually taken into a facility when he was asked by folks to get some material together for President Carter, who had been denied access to these files and subject by outgoing CIA Director George H.W. Bush, who served on this committee of 200 or 300 with Andrew Mellon and then later Senator John Warner. And I think one of the things that I remember you sharing was that you actually saw a file that had photos of a crashed ET craft that had writing on it. I think once you drew me the sort of hieroglyphic writing on it. And so this is all really very important information because it goes back decades and there are data point after data point after data point. And one of my big concerns is the discussion is always trying to recreate the wheel. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, are UFOs real? Are some extraterrestrial? Do we have advanced technologies? You know, I'm mocking it only because asked and answered, asked and answered. And the evidence is overwhelming. And the witness testimony and the documents and the drawings and the this, it's all there. And what they want people to do is stay in a cul-de-sac, running around in a circle, debating the same questions. And that is a diversion. That is a DDT, as I talked about earlier. Don't buy into that. Don't go there. We need to start moving forward because there's a lost century here of technology, knowledge, enlightenment, peaceful planet, free energy, a just social world where there is no poverty, there's no pollution. And this is not utopian Pollyanna jibber jabber. This is fully able to be accomplished in our lifetime. And it could have been accomplished, ironically, before I was born. And I was born in 1955. So the problem is, how much longer are we going to be killing the planet and engaging in endless wars instead of coming together, not only as a human family? I want to add to what Paula Harris said about all of us being part of the human. That would have been great in about 1900. Too late for that. We're already being visited by advanced civilizations. So I want to close with this sort of a visualization for a moment. And all of you take a moment and consider the fact that if you're still awake, you're awake. And the ability, the human conscious spirit, the ability to be conscious, whereby you're awake, and you're awake, and you're awake. We always are filtering it and attaching it to our own individual selves. But there's this consciousness field, this essence, the spirit of the awake being that is in fact, and been proven to be, a universal field that is not limited by time, space, body, or individual. This aspect of ourselves, this is the universal being. And we are all that. And we are going to have to identify with that first, then human, and then white or black or gay or straight, or Catholic or Protestant or Sunni or Shia. And this is why, you know, I told the story a couple of times when the first time I was sitting with Demi Lovato, who's an actress and singer, and it was during all the rioting and what was going on in the country in the past year. And I said, you know, we're going to have to go deeper. It's not enough to just involve yourself in a subculture identity. Notice that within culture, it's cult. And I think we have to begin to go, if we cannot go beyond the tribalism of division, then we are destined to end up destroying everything. Because we have to honor and look at how beautiful, it's like a beautiful garden with all kinds of different colors and shapes of flowers and plants and what have you. That's the human family. But within all those plants is the sap, the chi, the life, the energy that makes that life happen. And there is your point of commonality. And what's beautiful about that is that it's universal. So if there's the civilization that's out near Antares that exists, and read into that particular civilization, those beings are awake and they are conscious, and they're very different. I mean, look, if we're still fighting over our color or whether we're gay or straight or male or female, stuck in that kind of stuff for what now? Thousands of years? How are we ever going to have any semblance of peaceful relationship with these other civilizations? We have to find a point of commonality, of oneness that transcends even humanity. That is the big challenge we are facing. And so at the root of all of this, it's a deeply spiritual problem, not religious, spiritual, the essence of a spirit. And that is the conscious field and the awake being shining alike within all of us. And so when you look into the eyes of an extraterrestrial being, don't be freaked out that they look different from you. It's like people being freaked out that someone is a different color or a different sexual orientation or a different religion or a different race or ethnicity. That is where they want you, the demagogues, the warmongers. They want everyone to stay at that level fighting. And what we have to do is transcend that and realize that there is this ineffable but beautiful, and it's closer to us than our life's vein, aspect of ourselves that is a singularity of consciousness. And that is infinite. And that is operative fully within every sentient, awake being, whether it's human or extraterrestrial. Why is that important? Because unless we begin to go beyond what I call exo-racism, and Paula Harris was referring to this, they're the Nordics and they're the Greys and they're the, it's just this whole mythology of racism within this issue. And it is racist. We have to get into a post-racist era where not everything is filtered through your color or your religion or your ethnicity. Those are all sort of systems and identities that are very superficial. Because as a doctor, when I've seen people cut past the skin, they all bleed the same color. The brain is all the same within everybody. And deeper than that is this consciousness that is universal. And if we can connect to that, and it doesn't have to be through religious, fanatical things and what have you. It's simple. It's mindfulness. It's being aware of the mind and the consciousness and realizing, and this has been proven experimentally by Dr. John at Princeton and others, that conscious field isn't limited to space and time. And it's universal and infinite. And once we realize that, and if we go deep, connect to that aspects of ourselves, there are no aliens. They're all us, phasing and resonating throughout the cosmos as different sentient beings at different points on the path of enlightenment and of the drop of our individualities, returning to the ocean of the great being. That's the journey we're on. And so if we can really stay centered on that, we can go past racism and past human divisions and past exo-racism. Because exo-racism is what the people who manipulate us want us to go to. They want all of us to be united, but around another false dialectic, another false otherness. And that otherness this time is alien. And that's how they're going to continue to control humanity instead of us becoming free and enlightened and a civilization that's enlightened, an ugly future of conflict and division. And this is our choice. We can choose to be manipulated or not manipulated, to be awake or to be asleep. And so everyone listening, ultimately it is our choice. And when the ET said a new world, if you can take it, implied in that, if you will choose to accept this new world of a peaceful planet without massive weapons, without division. But that's not enough. There has to be added this deeper realization that the conscious spirit within us is universal, and the consciousness within these other life forms is the same. And to kill one of them is to kill ourselves. And so we are all one people. And the motto, when I started on this journey in 1990, I founded the CE5 Contact initiative. And the motto that I developed was one universe, one people. There's actually one people. I use the word people to include not just Homo sapiens, but all intelligent, conscious, higher intelligent beings capable of going and out into space or around their own planet. Though we have to understand that there is one conscious being shining within all of us. And that is an operative philosophy that's ancient and isn't limited to this religion or that religion. This is an understanding that is post-religious in a sense, or pre-religious, because religions are organizations. It's not one political party or another political party. It's not one race or another race. It's not one species or another species. And I always want to leave people with this idea. We have been indoctrinated since we were born, everyone on this planet, to identify and be afraid of anything different from us. This goes back evolution, sort of evolution biology, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of human experience. And we're a little bit hardwired that way, where, if it's a different tribe or a different entity, it's different, it's other, it could be a threat, it could kill us. So this is a human experience, and there's these epigenetic effects of our experiences that go through thousands of years that actually encode in our genes. But the reverse can happen, where we begin to accept another higher